Okay, hello. Today I want us to talk about um jobs and job security. And is job security a lie? And how do we build a career instead, right? And let's just get really real. So I pivoted my career 5 times. I started out as a school social worker. I have my master's in social work. I have my license, but then I quickly realized I wanted to do different, right? So what that different looked like meant that I've pivoted from school social worker and now I work as a change management slash trainer at a SaaS company. So let's just go through the journey, right? Um, I left. So I started school social worker and then I worked in higher ed, I worked in nonprofit, and then I landed in government. And when you land in especially local government, it's great, right? Like it's stable. I I know for a fact that if I had stayed at uh, that team, that company, I'm sick and like you could hear it, but my brain, if I had stayed with that team, if I had stayed in that local government job, I would still have a job. Why do I know this? Because every single person on my team is still at that job. One person left and they moved to another team, um, and then one person retired. But other than that, everyone else is still on that team. No one's ever been laid off. No one, nothing has happened. And I say this to say that after I pivoted and I went from local government and I switched over to tech, I was laid off after 3 years, right? So that's the risk that you're taking when you move, but I still think it was worth it, right? Because um, I think that when you stay in certain places, and you're unhappy, it shows in your work. Or when you're not learning as much as you would like to do, it would stay in your work. And I want to point out that, like, I've just listed two different types of pivot. One pivot was intentional. I left the government job. I was like, I'm okay. And it's actually really awkward. When I was leaving, um, it was over Zoom, right? And I really, I mean, I still talk to my boss, like to this day, like my former boss, and I didn't know how to quit. I was like mixture of like nervous laughter. I was just like, um, I don't know how to tell you, but I'm leaving. I was young, I was inexperienced, but I knew staying at that job was not where I needed to be. And my boss knew that too. So he was like, girl, it's all good. Like we will be here for you whenever. And truthfully, like really and truly, I have done some contracting work with the team because I love what I do, right? So what I did then, I worked in a department called Career and Technical Education. And what that meant was that I was supporting schools all around New York City in their CTE programs. That goes from software engineering to plumbing to culinary to agriculture, right? It was all about how do you support people who are not looking to go down a 4-year degree path but still want to either be in trade or do a 2-year pathway to still have very sustainable careers. And honestly, now when we look at the economy and work with AI, it's like those students that I was helping and those curriculums I was writing, like, yeah, those people are going to be good, right? But I was thinking, like, how do I scale this? I moved over to tech. Um, but when I moved over to tech, I was still doing something very similar, but outside of doing more direct trade work, I started doing more tech. So it's just like, how do you support people who don't have 4-year degrees or who want to upskill and learn new things within tech, right? So that's what I did. But my whole career has always been about workforce development, and that hasn't changed. So getting contracts to go back to my old job, it makes sense because I haven't changed my through line, which is like something that I really want to like focus on here. Because when people think about pivoting, people get really panicky because they're like, oh, how do I pivot? What do I do? And you need two things when you're pivoting. One, you either need to know an industry really, really, really well. So that could be, for example, for me, that was education. When I pivoted, I knew educate. When I pivoted from the local government to ed tech, I knew education really, really well and I understood workforce development within education. So moving from government to tech, even though I didn't know the tech world, and I was questioned on that quite a bit, I knew education. And every time, so I worked for a startup. So the people who interviewed me were the VP and the CEO or the founder. And there were 2 batches of questions pretty much that they were asking. 1, they were trying to figure out, like, how well did I know workforce development education? And 2, they were trying to figure out, like, would I succeed in tech? And every single question they hit me with around education and workforce development, 10-10. Like, the CEO told the recruiter, like, he was amazed, right? Like, I know my right? However, when they asked me about tech, I mean, I was still kinda confident. I was like, "Yeah, I got it, yada, yada," but, like, secretly, I was like, "I have no idea." And maybe they picked up on that, maybe they didn't, I don't know, I still got the job. But my point being here is I knew workforce development really well, I knew education really well, so that's the one thing I knew, and that's what I leaned on, and I knew that if I knew that well, I would be able to solve a problem for them as a startup trying to understand the workforce in America because they were coming from England. Now, it could be reverse. I could have gone in there and known tech really well. I could have gone in there and said, "Hey, I know how the tech landscape works. I know how tech companies grow and scale, and that is what I'm going to focus on," right? Maybe I don't know much about education, right? There were a lot of people who joined the company who knew nothing about education, but they knew tech really well, right? So when you're pivoting, you need to figure out what do you know really well and lean and run with that because what you lack you're gonna learn on the job eventually, but if you lead with that, why would someone hire you if you're talking about your lack, right? So I just wanna point that out. But I think I got off course. Let me just look at my notes because this video is about to it was supposed to be about job security. So let's go back to my notes. Give me a second. Okay, my notes were more about like my time at the tech startup and why job security is a bit of a myth, but you can create your own pathway. And what I mean by that is like when I moved over to tech, I was the third person hired. So by nature of being the third person hired, I did so much. My first official role was partnerships and outreach. So my job was to reach out to actually let me backtrack. The company's whole mission was to support people who didn't have degrees get into tech and more sustaining jobs, right? So meaning that rather than working at McDonald's like frontline, uh, we were or 7-Eleven or Uber or um, smaller companies where you didn't see yourself growing, our mission was to support you in getting into more sustaining careers so you can get a higher wage, but you can also see yourself. The whole goal was from apprenticeship to C-suite, right? So you were able to move up the career ladder. So with that said, I came in as partnerships and outreach, and I needed to find these people so we can get them the jobs, right? So the sales team was out here talking to Meta, Deloitte, McKinsey, Adyen, all these people saying like, "Hey, we can fill your empty slots that you're trying to hire for." So my job was to make sure we could actually do that. So I went and I reached out to community colleges, I reached out to nonprofits, I reached out to high schools, and I don't know if I talked about in this video, my previous video, I worked in CTE, which is Korean Technical Education. So I knew a lot of schools and a lot of people who did not want to go down the traditional 4-year pathway. Right. So um, with that said, when I started doing that, I did partnerships and outreach, and then I got the people in the pipeline. So once they were in the pipeline, it was like, okay, well, someone is coming from working double shifts at Amazon warehouse. Someone is coming from, someone was I think they weren't a producer, but they worked on movie sets. They were like the cameraman or something. Other people were doing boot camps, but they weren't finding jobs. Like so, we had a whole plethora of people who were coming to us, but they didn't know how to interview for these types of jobs that they wanted. So my job was to figure that out and plan a curriculum for that. So that's what I did. So my job then shifted from partnerships and outreach, and then I started supporting candidates in landing jobs. Then once I figured that out, another issue was like when you work with nonprofits and schools, they're kind of gatekeepers, which they should be, right? Because they want to protect their students. So we weren't getting enough talents that we needed to fulfill the deals that we were assigning. So then I became a marketer, and then I started a TikTok, which brought in over 1,000 applicants in one day, right? So then now I have partnerships under my belt, I have outreach under my belt, I have marketing under my belt, I have curriculum design under my belt. And then it also became a matter of research, right? How do you understand how not only the candidates are going through our platform, but the people that we're working with, the clients that we're working with. So it became UX research. And I can go on and on and on and on and on, right? But through it all, by working at this startup, I was able to do so many different jobs. And then what also that allowed me to do was figure out what I didn't like. So there were roles that I was like, oh, I do not like this, and I don't ever want to do this again. And the roles I was like, I definitely want to do this again. And kind of where I landed is that and maybe this is like ADHD, I don't know, I thrive in consulting positions, right? So I do well when it's just like I can work with several different clients around maybe a similar topic or similar theme. So, for example, with this job I'm talking about, the similar theme was how, well, I jumped in my head. So, one of the last jobs I did before I was laid off in that company was I was supporting our clients, so our Fortune 100s, and I was helping them onboard the talent. So, most of these companies were used to hiring people from college, from MBA programs, etc. So that's how their system they were asking interview questions that supported that. They assumed that people knew things that they didn't know. So my job was to say, hey, this is how you equitably interview. These are some questions that you can ask. You should have two people in the interview. When people in the interview, this is how you engage someone. Some things that maybe seem little to you, but like people were doing that was there for impacting the equity of how people were being hired and even the longevity. And as my company, one of our metrics was like, we obviously want the talent to stay for longer than 6 months. Right. So if the company didn't know how to support you and you were leaving in under 6 months, that became a problem. So that was something I had to fix. Um, so with that, what I learned was that I like helping people around something. So when I worked for the government, the thing that I was helping schools with was understanding what the economy needed and what type of curriculum they needed to build. When I first came into the ed tech, I was trying to understand the pain points of different nonprofits and schools in getting their students placed into work. And as I kept moving, I realized that I like understanding buckets of a problem and seeing how different companies and different clients solve it. And then because I've worked with so many different clients, I understand what the pain points are across the industry. So I'm like, oh, this is not unique to your company. So don't feel bad about it. This is something that industry is struggling with. But here's how I've seen it work. And here's what I've seen people do that is helpful. Or it's okay, you actually are in a slightly different position than this other company. So I think you should do this and this will work really, really well for you. Right. And think about this like Cardi just released her album I'm Not the Drama, and she was very New York with it. She was in the subway, she was in the streets, she was door dashing, she was doing all this stuff. Now, um, this is slightly different, but Lizzo, I think Lizzo is either from like Wisconsin or Minnesota or something like that. Midwest. If Lizzo went back to her roots, right? But then she wanted to do a Cardi rollout and then she was out here on trains. It would make no sense. Who in the Midwest is taking the subway? Nobody, right? So if I was her consultant, I would be like, okay, like what worked for Cardi and what we see work for musicians is authenticity. Same thing with Doechii, right? We know authenticity works. So how do we find authenticity with Lizzo? And I'm making all this up. Lizzo does not need my help, right? I'm just saying like what I like doing is understanding a bigger problem and understanding the patterns and trends and then helping individuals succeed. And that is basically what consulting is. So every job I've ever done, I've learned that this is what I like, so that's what I keep doing more of. However, I know I really, really don't like working with the same person, the same client for like years and years and years on end. Um, and like when I worked at my government job, everyone had regions, right? People had Queens, people had Manhattan, people had the Bronx, and they could tell you because they've been there for like 10, 20 years. They could tell you like when XYZ principal had his first child and when the child got sick, and they can tell you all these details about people, which I think people really love and people really thrive in. So, point being, to make your career last, you need to find out what works for you and then find places that work for you. And that is how you make your career last. So if you aren't sure what your through line is, I can put some links in the link thing below of some things, some questions to think through. Some of it is kind of like writing out what don't you like in your career. Some of it is writing out what your values are. For example, as I mentioned, what I don't like in my career is maybe staying in one place or one client for a long time. It just kind of drives me crazy a little bit. What my values are, I really love learning. I like an environment that encourages learning. I like to have autonomy, right? So I like working for remote native companies. Yes, because I like working remotely, but also if you work for a remote native company, intrinsically, what they're saying is that we trust you to do your work. So no one's going to really micromanage. That's not the culture, right? And I value that freedom, that autonomy. Um, I like working in tech or just different spaces that really value learning because that means I'm able to, like, one of the things that like one of my managers used to say was just like, do it and fail and see what happens, or do it and succeed. Like, it doesn't matter. The point is do it. Because if you do it, then you can learn from it, right? And I appreciate environments like that. So write a list of what you don't like doing, what your values are, and then that'll guide you a little bit more. All right. Thanks for watching today.